The Tarkath were a race of warriors forged in the fires of conflict. Their entire culture revolved around brute strength, where physical dominance was the only currency that mattered. They had no patience for subtleties like stealth or camouflage, dismissing them as the tools of the weak. Their advanced technology was designed to amplify their raw power, not to hide it. In the eyes of the Tarkath, open confrontation was the only honorable path to victory, and they took pride in their invincible reputation. They believed themselves to be the apex of evolution, looking down on other species as mere obstacles to their continued conquest of the galaxy. Among these so-called obstacles were the humans, a race the Tarkath barely considered worth their attention. Humans, with their reliance on strategy and cunning, were seen as cowardly, a species too afraid to stand and fight. The Tarkath Empire had spread its influence across countless star systems, crushing any opposition with overwhelming force. No one had ever challenged their dominance, and the idea that humans might pose any threat was laughable to them. The Tarkath believed they were destined to rule, and nothing in the universe had ever proven them wrong. When Earth refused to submit to Tarkath rule, the Empire didn't hesitate. They saw it as a minor annoyance, a rebellion that would be easily quelled. The Tarkath leadership decided to make an example of humanity. The order was given to launch a full-scale invasion, a show of force that would remind the galaxy of their unstoppable might. Captain Yarrick, a seasoned warrior with countless victories under his belt, was chosen to lead the invasion. To him, this was just another mission, a chance to display the power of the Tarkath and add another victory to his already impressive record. As he prepared his forces, Yarrick was confident. The humans were primitive in his eyes, barely worth the effort. He expected the campaign to be swift, a few decisive battles that would crush any resistance. His troops, eager for battle, shared his confidence. They looked forward to the easy victory that would come from overwhelming the humans with sheer force. The Tarkath fleet entered Earth's atmosphere with the precision of a well-oiled machine. They expected to encounter resistance immediately, but as they descended, there was nothing. No barrage of missiles, no fleet of human ships rising to meet them, just silence. Yarrick was puzzled but not concerned. He assumed the humans were hiding, too afraid to confront the Tarkath head-on. This only confirmed his belief that humanity was a weak, cowardly species. As his forces landed, they were met with eerie stillness. The cities below were deserted, the skies empty. The only sign of life was the wind howling through the empty streets, carrying with it a sense of foreboding that Yarrick couldn't quite place. The atmospheric conditions on Earth were strange, unlike anything the Tarkath had encountered before. The air was thick, almost oppressive, as if it were concealing something just out of sight. But the Tarkath, true to their nature, ignored these subtleties. They had come for battle, and battle was what they would find, or so they thought. As the Tarkath forces pushed deeper into human territory, their confusion grew. There were no signs of an organized defense, no signs of the humans at all. It was as if they had vanished. Yet, something was wrong. Yarrick felt it in his bones, a primal instinct honed through years of warfare. The humans were out there, somewhere, watching and waiting. But where? The silence that had greeted them upon arrival now felt ominous. The Tarkath had never encountered an enemy that fought like this, and the unknown made them uneasy. They were used to foes that stood their ground, not those who vanished into thin air. But the Tarkath were warriors. They would find their enemy, and they would crush them, just as they had done 1,000 times before. Or so they believed. As they continued their advance, the strange atmosphere around them seemed to close in, and for the first time, the Tarkath began to realize they were not the hunters, they were the hunted. The Tarkath invasion force began their ground assault with the same confidence that had led them through countless victories. They advanced steadily, expecting resistance at every turn, but encountered nothing but silence and empty landscapes. The absence of opposition felt more like an insult than a relief. The Tarkath were bred for combat, and the lack of a fight only fueled their contempt for humanity. However, this disdain soon turned to confusion as the first signs of trouble emerged. Patrols sent out to scout the area started to vanish. At first, these disappearances were dismissed as isolated incidents. Perhaps the humans had managed to capture a few soldiers, nothing more. But as more and more patrols failed to return, the unease among the troops began to grow. There were no signs of battle, no traces of conflict, just the stark reality that their comrades had disappeared without a trace. This was not how the Tarkath fought, and it was certainly not how they expected their enemies to engage them. The eerie silence that had once seemed like a tactical advantage now hung over them like a shroud, filled with ominous implications. Captain Jarek's frustration mounted with each passing hour. His elite warriors, trained for direct combat, were now vanishing into thin air, leaving behind no evidence of their fate. He had underestimated the humans, something he had never done before with any enemy. The realization hit hard. Humans were not engaging in open combat because they didn't need to. They were using advanced camouflage, blending into the environment so seamlessly that the Tarkath's sophisticated detection systems couldn't pick them up. The humans were there, striking from the shadows, and there was nothing the Tarkath could do to stop them. Yarok ordered his forces to adapt, deploying their most advanced detection technology, but it was no use. Every attempt to counter the human tactics was met with failure. The humans had anticipated their every move, neutralizing the Tarkath's technological advantages with ease. Yarok, once confident in his superiority, now found himself grappling with a foe that seemed to be always one step ahead. The battlefield had turned into a chessboard, with the humans outmaneuvering the Tarkath at every turn, using tactics that were as terrifying as they were effective. As the situation deteriorated, fear began to spread through the Tarkath ranks, something they had never experienced before. The humans were no longer just hiding, they were playing with their minds. Distorted sounds echoed through the air, shadows seemed to move of their own accord, and illusions blurred the line between reality and nightmare. Soldiers began to doubt their own senses, unsure if what they were seeing was real or another trick designed to disorient them. The once unshakable confidence of the Tarkath warriors crumbled as paranoia took hold. They started seeing enemies where there were none, turning on each other in confusion. Captain Yarok, who had led his forces through countless battles, now faced an enemy he couldn't see, couldn't predict, and couldn't defeat. The Tarkath's greatest strength, their unwavering belief in their own invincibility, was now their greatest weakness. The fear that had been sowed by the humans grew into full-blown terror, reducing the mighty Tarkath to frightened, desperate beings struggling to hold on to the last vestiges of their sanity. Jarek's once cohesive force was unraveling before his eyes, leaving him to confront the terrifying reality that this battle, which had begun with such certainty of victory, might end in their complete annihilation. Captain Yarok, faced with the vanishing of his warriors and the eerie silence of the battlefield, refused to accept defeat. He ordered a regrouping, commanding his remaining forces to tighten their ranks and conduct a more aggressive search for the elusive human enemy. He believed that brute force, the core of Tarka's strength, could still turn the tide. But as the search intensified, the panic among the Tarka soldiers grew. They began to see enemies in every shadow, and in their terror, they turned on each other. Comrades who had fought side by side for years now regarded each other with suspicion, mistaking familiar faces for those of their enemies. The situation spiraled out of control, and Yarok, once the embodiment of Tarkath confidence, began to feel a deepening sense of desperation. It wasn't just the physical disappearance of his warriors that troubled him, it was the growing realization that something far more sinister was at play. This was not a battle of strength but a battle of minds, and for the first time, Yarok felt the cold grip of fear. The breakthrough came when Yarok stumbled upon evidence that hinted at a darker truth. The humans were not merely hiding, they were waging a war on the Tarkath's very perceptions. Yarok uncovered data suggesting that the humans had developed an advanced form of psychological warfare, one that affected the mind itself. It was more than just camouflage, it was an assault on reality. The humans had found a way to manipulate the Tarkath's senses, making them see what wasn't there and miss what was right in front of them. This revelation hit Yarok hard. The battlefield, which the Tarkath had always controlled with brute force and technological superiority, had become a weapon in the hands of the humans. The ground they stood on, the air they breathed, everything was a potential tool of deception. The Tarkath, who had always prided themselves on their clear-eyed view of the world, were now trapped in a nightmare where nothing could be trusted. Yarrick realized with horror that the humans had turned the very essence of warfare against them, rendering the Tarkath's strengths useless. As the psychological assault continued, the Tarkath forces descended into chaos. The once disciplined soldiers became erratic, their behavior increasingly unpredictable. Some began to talk to shadows, convinced that they were communicating with lost comrades. Others lashed out at phantoms, swinging their weapons at enemies that existed only in their minds. The fear and confusion were overwhelming, and many Tarkath soldiers could no longer bear it. They began to abandon their posts, fleeing in desperation, trying to escape the nightmare that the battlefield had become. But there was no escape. The humans had crafted a prison of the mind, and there was no door out. Captain Yarrick, watching his forces crumble, knew that his once proud warriors were being systematically dismantled, not by superior firepower, but by an enemy they couldn't even see. The realization was devastating. Yarrick had led his forces into what he thought would be a simple victory, but instead, they were being torn apart by the very things they had once dismissed as weak and cowardly. The Tarkath had been outmatched not by strength, but by an intelligence and cunning they had never imagined. And now, as Yarrick stood alone amidst the ruins of his shattered force, he faced the grim truth. The battle was lost, and with it, the pride and honor of the Tarkath were gone forever. Yarrick, driven by desperation and the crumbling remains of his once mighty forces, ventured deeper into the heart of human territory. He was no longer guided by a strategy for victory, but by a need to understand what had unraveled the strength of the Tarkath so completely. As he pressed forward, the landscape around him grew increasingly strange, defying the laws of nature as he knew them. The air seemed alive, pulsing with an energy that tugged at the edges of his sanity. Shapes and sounds shifted unpredictably, making it impossible to distinguish reality from illusion. Every step deeper into this alien environment brought with it a growing sense of dread, yet Yarrick pushed on, driven by the need to find the source of this nightmare. His path led him to a place far removed from the modern world, a set of ancient ruins, hidden deep within the earth, where the very ground seemed to hum with a power that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. In these ruins, Yarrick uncovered the heart of the mystery, an ancient, dormant technology that radiated a power beyond anything he had ever encountered. The structure was alien, yet somehow familiar, as though it held a connection to a time long before the Tarkath had risen to power. As Yarrick studied the technology, the truth began to dawn on him. This was the source of humanity's incredible abilities to manipulate reality itself. This technology, buried deep within the earth for millennia, was the key to the humans' power that extended beyond mere physical camouflage or psychological warfare. It was a power that allowed them to bend time and space, to control the very fabric of reality. As the pieces fell into place, Yarrick's mind was flooded with images of Earth's early history, a time when ancient human civilizations had contact with a mysterious alien force. This force had left behind a legacy, one that humanity had only recently begun to understand and harness. The realization struck Yarrick like a hammer blow. The Tarkath had not been defeated by the humans alone, but by an ancient power that had slumbered beneath their feet for eons, waiting to be awakened. With this knowledge in hand, Yarrick made a desperate decision. He would destroy this ancient technology, the source of humanity's strength, and turn the tide of the battle once and for all. But as he moved to execute his plan, the humans, anticipating his every move, activated the technology. The air around him shimmered, and reality itself seemed to twist and bend. Yarrick found himself caught in the middle of a battle unlike any he had ever fought, one where time looped in on itself, and space became a maze of endless corridors and impossible angles. He watched in horror as his forces, those who had not yet been lost, were caught in this web, their actions repeating endlessly, with no way to escape. The full horror of the humans' power was revealed to him in that moment. They had not only defeated the Tarkath but had trapped them in a cycle of failure, a time loop from which there was no escape. Yarrick, once the proud leader of an invincible force, was now a prisoner of the very world he had sought to conquer. His final realization was the most devastating of all. This was no longer a battle for victory, but a struggle to survive in a reality that had been turned against him. The Tarkith invasion force had not just been defeated, they had been erased, trapped in a loop of time where they would vanish, without a trace, forever. The Tarkith warriors, once so sure of their superiority, now found themselves trapped in an unending nightmare. Time had become their prison, a loop from which there was no escape. Each day began the same way, with the hope that this time, they might break free. But no matter what they did, the outcome was always the same. They relived the same moments over and over, their advance, their confusion, their panic, and finally, their crushing defeat. The despair among the Tarkith forces was palpable as they slowly realized the true horror of their situation. They were not just losing a battle, they were doomed to repeat their failures indefinitely, without hope of victory or escape. The relentless cycle began to take its toll on their minds. Proud warriors, who had once stood unshaken in the face of any enemy, now found themselves breaking down, some driven to madness by the repetition, others choosing to end their own lives rather than face another day trapped in the loop. What had begun as a show of strength had become an endless torment, a punishment that would never end. From the human perspective, the situation was both a triumph and a burden. They had known about the ancient technology for some time, understanding its potential and its dangers. When the Tarkith invasion began, humanity's leaders had made a fateful decision. They chose not to destroy their enemy outright but to contain them, to trap them in a time loop where they could do no more harm. This strategy was born out of a desire to avoid unnecessary bloodshed, but it was not a decision made lightly. The leaders understood the gravity of their actions, knowing that they were condemning their enemies to an eternal cycle of failure and despair. The ethical dilemmas were profound. Was it right to use such power, even against an enemy as ruthless as the Tarkith? Could they justify the suffering they had inflicted, even if it meant saving their own people? These questions weighed heavily on the human leadership, but in the end, they believed they had made the best choice in a terrible situation. The Tarkith were contained, and humanity was safe, for now. In the aftermath of the battle, Earth stood victorious, but the victory came at a cost. The implications of what had been done were far-reaching, not just for humanity but for the entire galaxy. Other species, hearing of the Tarkith's fate, were forced to reconsider their perceptions of the once primitive humans. The Tarkith, who had once been the terror of the galaxy, were now a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of underestimating an opponent. But for humanity, the legacy of this battle was more complicated. They had won, but in doing so, they had unleashed a power that could not easily be controlled. The ancient technology that had saved them had also revealed a darker side of their nature, a willingness to use any means necessary to survive. In the end, the victory over the Tarkith was bittersweet. It had proven humanity's strength, but it had also shown the galaxy, and themselves, the unforeseen consequences of wielding such power. The final reflection on this chapter of history was not one of triumph but of caution, a reminder that in war, the greatest danger often lies not in the strength of the enemy but in the choices one makes to defeat them.